So if you walk into like a cutting-edge IVF clinic today, you are going to see some incredibly intimidating tech. I mean, million-dollar equipment everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. It's a completely different world in there.
Right. You're looking at these sterile labs and synthetic incubators, complex hormone schedules. You've got embryologists evaluating microscopic cell divisions on these massive screens.
Yeah, it is highly, highly specialized.
And, millions of people face fertility challenges every year. And the entire process of assisted reproductive tech, it can feel entirely mechanical, almost um, cold in a way.
It really can. It can feel very disconnected from the human body.
Totally.
Yeah.
But what if the secret to making all of that futuristic 21st century science actually work? What if it might just be a botanical herb and like a 2,000-year-old needle?
It's a massive contrast, isn't it? I mean, we're taking the most advanced reproductive technologies human beings have ever developed, and we're pairing them with systems of medicine that predate the invention of the microscope by, thousands of years.
And that is exactly the friction we're diving into today. Okay, let's unpack this. For this deep dive, we've pulled a really fascinating stack of sources for you. We're looking at peer-reviewed studies from heavy-hitting journals.
Right, places like fertility and sterility.
Yeah, and human reproduction.
Yeah.
Plus a whole bunch of clinical papers. And all of this research is tracking one very specific thing, which is the integration of traditional Chinese medicine, specifically acupuncture and herbal formulas, with modern fertility science.
But our mission for you today is very specific. We're not here to just debate if this integration works.
Right, because the clinical outcomes are already published.
Exactly. The data is there. Instead, we want to look under the hood at the exact physiological mechanics. We want to understand the blood flow, the hormonal shifts, the oxygen delivery at a cellular level.
The actual biology of it all.
Right. We're going to break down exactly how these ancient practices physically optimize the human body to create and, sustain life.
So when I first looked at the sources, I'll admit, I had a hard time reconciling the two worlds. On one hand, you have a doctor injecting a single sperm into an egg under a microscope. And on the other, you have targeted acupuncture. It feels like they shouldn't even be in the same building.
That's a really common reaction, honestly. It feels like a collision of two entirely different philosophies.
Yeah, exactly.
But the reality we see in the clinical data is much more of a collaboration. The biggest misconception is that traditional medicine is just sort of energetic magic.
Right, like it's just good vibes or something.
Exactly, and it's not. We are looking at evidence-backed, measurable biological changes. We're tracking the physical widening of blood vessels, the measurable drop in cortisol, the stabilization of cell membranes. It's purely physiological.
All right, so if we're looking at the mechanics, we need to start at the very beginning of the biological assembly line. You can't start a pregnancy without a healthy egg.
That is step one, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So how does traditional medicine impact the actual foundation of fertility? The sources call it oocyte maturation, or egg quality. And the research heavily emphasizes that egg quality naturally declines with age. It specifically highlights the benefits for women over 37.
Well, age is the chronological factor, yes. But the actual biological villain at the cellular level is oxidative stress. If you want to understand declining egg quality, you really have to understand oxidative stress.
I feel like I hear that term thrown around in skincare commercials all the time. But what does it actually mean inside an ovary?
Think of oxidative stress like rust on a car, but happening to your cells.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So as we age or experience stress or are exposed to environmental toxins, our bodies produce these unstable molecules called free radicals.
And those are the bad guys.
Right. They are missing an electron, so they fly around aggressively stealing electrons from healthy cells just to stabilize themselves.
And when they steal from the cells of an egg or oocyte, they damage the cell membrane and the DNA inside. That cellular rust severely complicates fertilization and healthy embryo development.
I love that visual. Okay, so think of this whole process like gardening.
Oh, yeah, I like that.
IVF provides the perfect, meticulously selected seeds, the embryos. But if the soil is totally dry, toxic, and lacking nutrients, nothing is going to grow.
Right, the environment matters.
And in the human body, the soil quality is basically dictated by blood flow. The sources explain that acupuncture actively increases ovarian blood flow. But here's where I really need to push back.
Go for it.
Because I think you and I both know what the listener is picturing right now. I'm looking at these studies, and IVF is this incredibly delicate, microscopic procedure. Putting a tiny needle in someone's leg or arm Feels entirely disconnected from what is happening deep inside a pelvic organ.
It does seem like a leap.
Right, like how does a needle in a limb talk to a follicle?
What's fascinating here is that that is the perfect question to ask, because that's where the science gets really interesting. It's not the needle itself injecting anything into the ovary.
Okay.
It's the systemic nervous system response that the needle provokes. When you stimulate specific acupuncture points, you are sending a signal up the peripheral nervous system to the brain, specifically the hypothalamus.
The Grand's control center.
Exactly. The brain then signals the vascular system to dilate or open up the blood vessels feeding the reproductive organs.
Wait, so it's essentially a neurological command to just open the floodgates.
That's exactly it. And by increasing that specific localized blood flow to the ovaries, you are suddenly delivering a massive influx of vital oxygen and nutrients directly to the developing follicles.
Giving them exactly what they need to grow.
Right. And the body lowers stress hormones like cortisol, which in turn reduces that oxidative stress, that rust we just talked about.
Wow.
The cellular environment completely shifts. The eggs are no longer just surviving in a high-stress, low-oxygen state. They're actually thriving.
And the studies also point out that this process helps regulate crucial reproductive hormones, right? Things like follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH, and estrogen.
Yes, which is critical.
Which I imagine just makes the whole ovarian stimulation process during IVF a lot more predictable for the doctors.
It does. It creates a much more stable baseline. But then you have to factor in the second half of the traditional medicine protocol, which is the herbal medicine component.
Right, the botanical formulas. The clinical data shows that these herbs provide incredibly dense, natural antioxidants.
Exactly.
So if free radicals are the things stealing electrons and causing the rust, these botanical antioxidants are essentially stepping in and freely donating their own electrons, neutralizing the threat before it hits the egg.
They are acting as a shield, yes.
The sources associate these herbs with reduced inflammation and actually aiding the mitochondrial function inside the eggs. It's like sending microscopic reinforcements to protect the ovarian cells while they mature.
And we don't just have to guess if this works in theory. We see the definitive results in the clinical trials.
Oh, right, the data.
I want to point you to a landmark trial by a researcher named Paulus back in 2002. It was published in Fertility and Sterility.
Okay.
They took two groups of women going through IVF. One group received acupuncture, the other didn't. The clinical pregnancy rate for the control group was around 26%.
Okay, 26%.
The group receiving acupuncture, over 42%.
Wait, really? Over 42? That is a massive statistical leap.
It is huge, because women receiving these treatments during ovarian stimulation are frequently producing more mature eggs, and the embryos that result from those eggs are simply of a higher structural quality.
So you optimize the soil, the seeds have a fundamentally better chance.
Exactly.
But here is where we need to pivot. We've spent all this time optimizing the egg to survive oxidative stress.
Mm-hmm.
But it takes two to tango.
It certainly does.
If the egg is the environment, what happens if the sperm entering it is already damaged by that exact same stress? It's a really common misconception to focus entirely on the female body when we talk about fertility clinics.
It is an incredibly pervasive bias. But fertilization strictly requires two biological halves. So logically, we have to look at how these same circulatory and physiological principles apply to male biology.
And I'll be honest, I was shocked by a statistic in our sources. Male factor infertility contributes to up to 40% of all infertility cases.
Up to 40%. Yeah.
40%. That feels like the totally forgotten factor in so many of these conversations.
It gets overlooked constantly in the public conversation, but inside the clinic, it's a massive hurdle. Male reproductive health is highly sensitive to environmental toxins, lifestyle, and physiological stress.
Makes sense.
Just as we saw with the ovaries, testicular function relies entirely on two things: optimal blood flow and strict temperature regulation.
And that temperature regulation part is wild to me. The human body has a somewhat absurd biological design where sperm production has to happen outside the main body cavity just to stay a couple of degrees cooler.
It is a very delicate system.
It's so finicky. But the sources detail how acupuncture actually helps regulate scrotal temperature. That is such a hyper-specific mechanical fix to a biological problem.
It's a prime example of traditional medicine addressing a very mechanical, physical requirement. If the temperature is too high, sperm production just plummets.
Wow.
Acupuncture helps regulate the microcirculation in that specific area, bringing the temperature down to the optimal range. But beyond just temperature, you have the exact same issue of cellular damage we saw with the eggs.
The rust again.
Right. And this is where the herbal medicine protocols for men really shine.
Because the botanicals used for male protocols are loaded with polyphenols and flavonoids, right?
Yes, exactly.
These are essentially heavy-duty, plant-based antioxidants.
Mhm.
They're going in and fighting off the free radicals that specifically target and harm sperm cell membranes and damage the sperm DNA itself.
And the microscopic evidence for this is undeniable. There's a critical study from 2005 by a researcher named Pei.
Okay, the Pei study.
They didn't just look at pregnancy rates. They used advanced electron microscopy to quantitatively evaluate the spermatozoa before and after treatment.
So they were actually looking at the physical structure of the cells.
Exactly. And what they found was that men who received acupuncture and herbal treatments had significantly better sperm ultrastructure.
Ultrastructure, meaning the literal physical architecture of the individual sperm was visibly improved on a microscopic level.
Yes. A sperm cell has a very specific anatomical job. It needs a perfectly shaped head to penetrate the egg, a midpiece packed with mitochondria to generate power, and a functioning tail to propel it forward.
Right.
The advanced microscopy confirmed far fewer physical defects in the head and tail architecture of the treated men.
So think of it like a vehicle. If the sperm has a damaged tail and a warped head, it's basically a broken-down car trying to drive through a swamp.
That is a very accurate way to put it.
But if you improve that ultrastructure, you are turning it into a guided missile. You naturally get higher motility, meaning they swim straighter and faster,
Yeah.
and an overall increased concentration of healthy cells.
Exactly. When you synthesize all of this, the hormonal optimization, the better testosterone balance, the reduced oxidative stress, and the physical protection of the sperm DNA, it leads directly to what major American and European reviews have noted for years.
Which is?
You get higher fertilization rates. And this holds true even in highly clinical advanced settings like ICSI.
Now, ICSI is when the embryologist takes a single microscopic sperm and physically injects it directly into the center of the egg.
Correct. Intracytoplasmic sperm injection.
Right.
Even when you are bypassing the entire swimming process, the internal DNA quality of that single sperm dictates whether the embryo will develop properly. Protecting that DNA is paramount.
So we have a really complete picture forming here. We've optimized the leukocyte maturation, ensuring a healthy, high-quality egg. We've protected the sperm DNA and improved its physical ultrastructure. We have the perfect embryo.
We do. But, the journey is far from over. Where does that embryo actually go? Because if the environment it's entering isn't hospitable, all of those previous microscopic victories don't matter at all.
And that brings us to arguably the most critical connection in this entire process, which is the uterus. We have to look at the environment where the embryo actually needs to implant and grow.
The landing pad.
Exactly. And specifically, we need to address a very real, very prevalent, and often completely silent threat, which is early pregnancy loss.
Right. Our sources introduce this clinical concept called endometrial receptivity. Basically, it's a measure of how welcoming the uterine lining is to an embryo.
Yes, and it has very specific metrics.
To be optimally receptive, the lining needs to reach a very specific thickness, usually between 8 to 10 millimeters. But it's not just about thickness. It also needs to show a highly specific triple-line pattern when the doctor looks at it on an ultrasound monitor.
And achieving that plush thickness and that distinct, healthy structural pattern all comes down to one basic thing, which is blood supply. Which leads us to the dark cloud hovering over this part of the process, which is hypoxia. Hypoxia is a term for insufficient oxygen delivery to a tissue.
Right.
Our sources identify poor uterine blood flow, which creates this hypoxic, low-oxygen environment as a leading contributor to miscarriage. It impairs the early development of the placenta, it triggers massive inflammatory responses, and it completely disrupts the delicate balance needed to sustain early pregnancy.
Hypoxia is so dangerous precisely because it is a silent threat. The patient cannot feel if their uterine tissue is hypoxic.
I have no idea.
None. But building a placenta and growing an embryo requires an immense amount of cellular energy. If the blood flow is restricted, the oxygen isn't there. And if the oxygen isn't there, the tissue simply cannot support those energy demands, and the pregnancy fails.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because we aren't just talking about theory. Dong's 2024 study looks specifically at how acupuncture fixes this.
He did.
The study mentions they measured improvements in the pulsatility index and the resistance index, which, to be honest, sounds like complete jargon to the average person.
It is very technical.
But As I understand it, you can think of a uterine artery like a garden hose. If the hose is kinked or the rubber is really tense and constricted, the resistance is high and the water just sort of trickles out.
That's a perfect analogy. Acupuncture essentially unkinks the hose. It relaxes the smooth muscle walls of the blood vessels, which physically lowers the impedance or the resistance in those uterine arteries.
Wait, they aren't just taking the patient's word for it that they feel more relaxed, right? They are physically watching these arteries widen on a screen.
Yes, using Doppler ultrasounds. Doppler technology bounces sound waves off moving red blood cells to measure their exact velocity.
Oh, wow.
So researchers can sit there in real time, watch the monitor, and literally see the resistance drop. They watch the arteries dilate, and a rush of oxygen-rich blood flood into the uterus immediately following the acupuncture treatment.
It's just a profound intersection of an ancient technique and modern diagnostic measurement.
It really is. And, this isn't a new discovery either. A major European study by Stenner Victorin, all the way back in 1996, definitively proved this reduction of blood flow impedance in the uterine arteries of infertile women.
1996, wow.
Yeah, and the most important finding of that study was that the improvement persisted. The increased blood flow didn't just stop the second the needles were removed, it maintained that healthy environment over time.
Which is crucial because it's not just about getting pregnant. It is about staying pregnant.
Exactly.
There's a really interesting Western feasibility study by Betts from 2012 that explored using acupuncture specifically for women experiencing threatened miscarriage. They found that it was incredibly helpful in reducing the physical symptoms, the bleeding, the cramping.
And the emotional toll, too.
Right, significantly lowering the severe anxiety that comes with that terrifying experience.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, counteracting hypoxia is about creating foundational stability. By delivering that steady, robust supply of oxygen and nutrients to the endometrium, you are building a stable scaffolding for the placenta to form.
Giving it a real anchor.
Right. You are bridging that incredibly precarious gap between the moment of conception and a sustained, viable pregnancy.
And the herbal formulas step in to complement this phase too, don't they? They help stabilize progesterone levels, which is the hormone that tells the body to hold on to the pregnancy, while also providing a gentle anti-inflammatory effect. It's a dual approach to warding off that hypoxic stress.
Precisely. It ensures the environment remains as supportive and quiet as possible during those incredibly critical first few weeks.
Okay, so what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've talked about the cellular mechanisms, the electron microscopes, the Doppler ultrasounds. We know the how and the why. But how does someone facing these daunting fertility challenges actually step into this integrated world?
That's the real question.
Right, we need to transition from this abstract, incredible science to its tangible application. Who bridges this gap in the real world?
That is the vital next step, because understanding the science is one thing, but finding practitioners who actually know how to seamlessly integrate these traditional modalities with conventional reproductive endocrinology, that's a completely different challenge.
Yeah. You can't just go to anyone.
No, you need a highly specialized expert.
And our sources point us directly to a pioneer in this exact space, Mike Berkeley. He's a licensed acupuncturist, a fellow of the American Board of Oriental Reproductive Medicine, and he's the founder of the Berkeley Center for Reproductive Wellness, located in Midtown East Manhattan.
His background is particularly notable because of his timeline in the industry. He graduated from the Pacific College of Oriental Medicine in New York back in 1996, and he established his center just a year later in 1997.
So he'd been doing this for a minute.
He has been at the forefront of this integration for a very long time.
And here is the major distinction that our sources really highlight about his practice. Mike Berkeley was the first specialist in the United States to dedicate his practice entirely, exclusively, to reproductive wellness using these integrated methods.
Which is a huge detail.
Right. He isn't treating a guy with a sprained ankle in room A and then trying to solve complex infertility in room B. This is his sole focus.
That exclusivity matters immensely. When you are dealing with something as highly complex, sensitive, and emotionally taxing as reproductive endocrinology, you want a practitioner who lives and breathes that specific science every single day.
And for nearly 3 decades, the most impressive part is that he hasn't been working in opposition to Western medicine. He's not telling patients to, abandon their doctors.
Never.
He works directly in tandem with leading reproductive endocrinologists to optimize their IVF outcomes. He's looking at their lab work, understanding their hormone protocols, and providing individualized herbal medicine and acupuncture treatments right alongside the conventional medical care.
Which really represents what the gold standard of modern healthcare should look like.
Absolutely.
It's evidence-informed, it's highly tailored to the individual's specific lab results, and most importantly, it's compassionate care that doesn't force a patient into a false dichotomy. You shouldn't have to choose between ancient wisdom and modern clinical science.
You don't have to pick a side.
No, you can and absolutely should utilize the immense strengths of both.
It's about leaving no stone unturned and using every proven tool available to achieve your family-building goals. It's just a phenomenal journey when you step back and look at the whole picture we've painted today.
That really is.
I mean, we started this deep dive looking at the absolute foundation of it all, preventing cellular rust to optimize the mitochondria inside a single egg. We looked at advanced microscopy, proving we can physically rebuild the ultrastructure of a swimming sperm.
And we traced those microscopic beginnings all the way up to watching uterine arteries physically dilate on an ultrasound monitor, changing the blood flow and oxygen levels in the uterus to defeat hypoxia and sustain a pregnancy.
It fundamentally changes how you view the entire fertility process. And that is really why this matters to you. Whether you are currently in the trenches of your own family-building journey, whether you're trying to support a friend who is just exhausted by the grueling process of IVF, or even if you're just someone fascinated by the sheer miraculous mechanics of human biology.
Being truly well-informed means looking past the artificial boundaries we've constructed in medicine.
Exactly. It's about understanding that the sterile clinical precision of an IVF lab and the targeted physiological response of a botanical herb or an acupuncture needle are not at odds with each other. They're deeply complementary forces.
Very much so.
And that brings me back to that initial image we started with, the cold clinical fertility clinic. We've been conditioned to expect that advanced medicine has to be just machines, synthetic hormones, and petri dishes. But the human body is an ecosystem. It's not a machine.
And optimizing an incredibly complex biological ecosystem requires a much broader, more integrated perspective.
Which leaves me with a final thought. I really want you to mull over, long after this deep dive ends. We have just spent all this time diving into the clinical data, proving that optimizing microcirculation, lowering cortisol, and delivering oxygen through these ancient practices can literally create the environment needed to spark and sustain human life.
The very beginning of life.
Right. It works at the genesis of life itself. So if these traditional methods hold the key to solving such profound, complex physiological issues in reproductive science, what other modern medical blind spots in entirely different fields of health might traditional medicine hold the key to unlocking?